This is BBC World News America. Reporting from Washington, I'm Rajini Vaidyanathan. Amid mounting fury, President Trump signs an executive order reversing the policy of separating migrant children from their parents.
Anybody with a heart would feel very strongly about it. We don't like to see families separated. At the same time, we don't want people coming into our country illegally. This takes care of the problem.
A special report from Zimbabwe, where the government's promising free and fair elections following years of repression under Robert Mugabe. And with more women than ever running for office in the midterm elections, we'll look at how the Me Too movement is inspiring candidates. Welcome to World News America. In what's quite the climb down, President Trump signed an executive order today, ending the controversial policy of separating migrant children from their parents at the US-Mexico border. His reversal on the issue followed an outcry on both sides of the political aisle and pressure from human rights groups. But even as he was announcing the order, the president stressed the need to toughen America's immigration laws. The BBC's Nick Bryant has more.
A tent encampment close to the Mexican border that's become a sweltering detention centre for some of the thousands of children taken from their parents. Donald Trump's zero-tolerance immigration policy has provoked outrage across America and around the world.
We're going to have a lot of happy people.
So today from the president, that rare thing, a reversal, a climb down. And all it took to end child separation was the flourish of his pen.
So we're going to have strong, very strong borders. But we're going to keep the families together. I didn't like the sight or the feeling of families being separated.
This was a political crisis of his own making. And up until today's turnaround, this America First president had fiercely defended the crackdown.
We want a great country. We want a country with heart. But when people come up, they have to know they can't get in. Otherwise, it's never going to stop.
But these images of children in what looked like cages were too much even for loyal Republican leaders to stomach. Child separation had become politically untenable. Democrats were winning the argument.
This is going on too long, and it must stop, and it must stop now, not tomorrow, but now.
Last night in Washington, the woman who's implemented zero tolerance, the head of Homeland Security, was hounded by protesters. Kirsten Nielsen had been having a working dinner at a Mexican restaurant. This stretch of the Rio Grande River is a favoured crossing point for illegal immigrants, and families are continuing to make the treacherous journey across the border. Donald Trump remains determined to stop them.
If you're weak, which some people would like you to be, if you're really, really pathetically weak, the country's going to be overrun with millions of people. And if you're strong, then you don't have any heart. That's a tough dilemma. Perhaps I'd rather be strong, but that's a tough dilemma.
Images have the power to define a presidency. These will linger in the national memory long after child separations have come to an end.
Nick Bryant reporting there. Well, for more on the situation on the ground, we can cross to Gary O'Donoghue, who's in the border town of Brownsville, Texas. Gary, what does this now mean for many of the children who are detained where you are and across Texas?
Well, I don't think it means that they will be reunited with their parents overnight. We're looking at somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 who've been separated since the autumn. Now, we have no idea at this stage how many of those children have been reunited by now, but we know that around 2,300 were separated in the last 5 weeks alone. So there are a lot of people to put back together. The difficulty, of course, is finding the space to house them, to accommodate them together. We know that the president is asking the defense secretary to come up with places, other executive agencies as well. But of course, the argument of the administration was that this splitting up of families was a deterrent to migrants coming in over the border illegally. Presumably the logic of their position now is that those numbers will increase. Now they've removed that deterrent.
And Gary, what's been the reaction from the wider community where you are to this executive order?
Well, I think it's just sinking, but you're seeing some of the groups, the liberal groups and the immigration campaigning groups starting to issue a cautious welcome. What they all point out, of course, is that this is not the end of zero tolerance. So this is not the end of people being automatically arrested as soon as they come over the border and prosecuted. That will continue. And I think you see in the executive order, Rajini, also an admission by the government that the existing restrictions, if you like, on the amount of time you can keep children in any kind of detention, be it with their parents or not, this 20-day limit, that is going to be breached. And that's why Jeff Sessions, as part of that order, the Attorney General, going to court to try and get that part of the law overturned.
Gary O'Donoghue, thanks very much. Well, now for more context, I'm joined by Michelle Brain from the Women's Commission for Refugee Women and Children. Michelle, thank you very much for coming into the studio today. You have been calling for an end to this separation policy, so you must be pleased with the President's actions today.
Well, actually, we're quite concerned because we really feel that this is a trick. The President is really just trading one form of trauma for another. What the executive order today means is that they will be detaining children in family detention centers, which really are prisons and have been found repeatedly by courts, by medical professionals, mental health professionals, advocates, and even security professionals to be inappropriate for children.
And you've actually seen some of these facilities, is that right, Michelle?
I have. I've visited them many times. I mean, they really are, regardless of how you want to dress them up, they are detention centers or prisons for children. They are not able to leave. They have enormous psychological and medical, physical effects on children's well-being. And I can tell you that I went as part of a federal advisory committee that was pulled together by former Secretary of Homeland Security Jay Johnson. And unanimously, the professionals on that committee found that detention was inappropriate for children and should be avoided at all costs.
What is the solution, Michelle? We heard the President just then saying there needs to be a deterrent for illegal immigration. If it's not this, then what is it?
So there are several issues with the President's statement. First of all, these are families who are seeking protection in our country. They're seeking asylum, which is their legal right. And that issue is being ignored by this administration. And in fact, not only ignored, it's intentionally ignored because they're actually trying to prevent access to that procedure. The other issue here is that there are many alternatives to either detaining or separating families. In particular, there was a program called the Family Case Management Program. It was found to be 99.8% effective in ensuring that people showed up for their hearings, went to court, and even, in many cases, left the country.
And what is that then, that alternative, this case program?
It's called the Family Case Management Program. This administration, the Trump administration, shut it down in June of 2017 with no explanation. And in fact, I believe that they paid a penalty for shutting it down early.
But I think a lot of the supporters of the President, and of course the President himself, say that there does need to be some tough action. He regrets that, as you see, and that's why he's made this U-turn. But what else can act as a deterrent if he doesn't get tough?
It is not legal to use deterrence to discourage people from seeking asylum. I mean, I think that's really the key. The key here is deterrence doesn't work. Study after study has shown that if people are fleeing violence, they're not going to be deterred by punitive action. And in fact, even Secretary of State, Secretary of Homeland Security Jay Johnson, who tried also to use family detention as a deterrent, wrote an op-ed recently saying it doesn't work. In the end, it might have a very temporary effect to decrease immigration, but in the end, people who are fleeing for their lives are going to flee that burning house no matter what it takes.
And Michelle, this has all come on World Refugee Day.
Especially troubling. The United States, as many people know, has been seen as a place of refuge, a place that led the world in creating the Human Rights Convention and asylum procedures, and we're really turning our backs on that process today.
Michelle Brain, thanks very much for coming in.
You're welcome.
Now, dealing with migration is, of course, hardly a uniquely American problem. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who's facing pressure at home to crack down on immigration, says it's a global challenge which needs an international response. Her comments come ahead of Sunday's EU meeting to discuss the issue. For a snapshot of how European countries are responding, let's hear now from Gavin Lee on board the rescue ship Aquarius off the coast of Spain, Nick Thorpe, who's in Hungary, and our correspondent James Reynolds, who's in Rome.
In recent years, more than 500,000 migrants have made it here to Italy. Many of them passed through this, Rome's main train and bus station, on their way to the rest of the continent. Italy's new populist government is now taking tough action. It's already closed its ports to foreign-flagged rescue boats. It now demands that the rest of the EU share the migration burden. And in the long run, it wants to shut down for good the migration route across the Mediterranean.
Here in Budapest, the Hungarian parliament has just voted to create a new criminal offence. It's called facilitating illegal immigration, and it targets human rights groups which work with asylum seekers. The government argues that it's necessary in order to prevent Hungary from becoming what it calls an immigrant country. From now on, human rights activists and lawyers could be imprisoned for printing leaflets or even for meeting with clients.
The political clash between European countries over the continuing illegal migration to Europe has played out on board this ship, the charity-run Aquarius, over the past few days. A week-long, 1,000-mile journey has taken 630 migrants from off the coast of Libya here to Spain because Italy refused to take them in. Now the ship is returning off the coast of Libya to take and rescue migrants from rubber boats. We'll be on board for the next 7 days, and until there is a resolution between EU leaders, then there's no sense of knowing what will happen to those migrants on this ship and where they'll go.
In other news from around the world, the European Union will launch a raft of retaliatory tariffs against US exports on Friday. The move comes after President Donald Trump imposed steep duties on steel and aluminium earlier this month. EU officials said they'll target American imports such as blue jeans, motorbikes and bourbon whiskey. The UN says war crimes were committed in the battle for eastern Ghouta in Syria. Investigators said Syrian pro-government forces deliberately attacked hospitals, bombarded civilians' homes and denied them food. But the UN also accused rebel forces of committing a war crime by indiscriminately shelling residents in Damascus. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's been admitted to hospital for the birth of her first child. The 37-year-old set to become the second world leader to have a child while in office, the first being Pakistan's Benazir Bhutto in 1990. Deputy Winston Peters is now acting Prime Minister. A spacecraft that will collect space junk has been released from the International Space Station. The removed debris satellite is an experimental craft with a net and a harpoon. In this way, scientists hope to be able to snare rogue hardware like old rocket parts and broken fragments of spacecraft that are currently circling around the Earth. Zimbabwe's government's told the BBC that it's committed to free and fair elections next month, following years of repression under Robert Mugabe. The country's new leader, Emmerson Mnangagwa, is campaigning on a promise of economic recovery, and he's pledged to end the violence against political opposition that occurred under the former leader. Our Africa editor Fergal Keane sent this report from the campaign trail.
Ready for the fight, but this time it's promised without a campaign of beatings, torture and imprisonment. More than 6 months after the army overthrew Robert Mugabe, the new president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, in his trademark scarf, is trying to reinvent himself and his country. He was instrumental in the brutalities of the old regime, but knows that despite the revolutionary gestures, what his people want now are jobs.
We are a new Zimbabwe. We are a new era. We want a new future.
President Mnangagwa believes he will win this election because enough people will feel grateful to him for getting rid of Robert Mugabe, and that even if they don't forgive or forget, they'll be willing to set to one side their memories of his party's brutality and corruption.
And consider this, an opposition rally right outside a police station. They can but watch when once they might have attacked. The movement for democratic change is struggling to overcome internal divisions. Its leader, Nelson Chamisa, is a lawyer and a pastor. There's an evangelical fervour about his campaign.
I'm very confident. Yeah, very confident. There's no way Mnangagwa is going to defeat me in this election. The people are clear, the people are supporting, and we are happy.
But away from the cheering crowds, this is a badly wounded country, and victims of past violence find it hard to trust in a new Zimbabwe. This woman's father was killed during one of Robert Mugabe's crackdowns. She's asked us to protect her identity.
He had nothing, no clothes on him. He was just lying on the road. They torture him. He was dead. He had bruises all over his body. I don't think anything has changed because justice was not done to my father.
But the pressure to change is immense, mostly because the government needs foreign investment and aid to rescue a broken economy. Queues at banks where cash withdrawals are rationed to $50 a day. At a bus station, boarding for South Africa in the hope of finding work. Or bringing back goods to sell on the streets.
The economy is very poor. We don't have food, we don't have jobs here.
We're going to struggle for something like 5 to 6 years without even getting a job. So we are only surviving through these buses.
We expect that the situation will return to normalcy.
Their leaders who drove Robert Mugabe from power now wear civilian suits. The general who announced the coup is now the foreign minister. Have you really changed? Has the president changed from the people who were part of that system of corruption and brutality into people who can be trusted as democrats?
I can assure you, the president is not, and the president is a different person. He is now the chief executive of the country. He has learned, he has had the experiences of where things went wrong. And this is exactly where he is correcting issues.
While the opposition leader campaigns freely, human rights groups say there's been some intimidation. International observers have already arrived to monitor the poll.
And we welcome you all!
Zimbabwe is changing, but only free and fair elections will prove whether change is permanent and hope justified. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Zimbabwe.
And we'll have full coverage of those elections in the coming weeks. You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's programme, is the sun rising or setting on our civilization? That's the question behind a major new exhibition by American artist Ed Ruscha. Almost 200 people are still missing after a ferry sunk into Lake Toba in Indonesia. Only 18 survivors have been found so far. Rebecca Henschke has more from Jakarta.
The wooden boat that sank in this picturesque volcanic lake when it hit bad weather is believed to have been 3 times over capacity. Authorities say it was operating illegally and didn't hand out tickets to passengers, so there is no details about who was on board or how many people. Authorities are having to go off families coming forward and reporting their missing loved ones. Search teams are still combing the lake looking for any survivors. They'll say they'll do that for at least in the next 7 days. And an information centre has been set up on the side of the lake for desperate families seeking news. This would be Indonesia's worst maritime accident for years, but they are not uncommon. In the last week, there has been 4 boat accidents.
A record number of women are running for office in the US midterm elections this year. Whatever side of the aisle, many are inspired by the Me Too movement. I've been to meet 2 candidates running head-to-head in the state of Pennsylvania, which is currently represented by 18 members of Congress, but all of them are men.
I was a victim of campus sexual violence when I was in college. Going through the criminal justice system as a victim was one of the worst experiences of my life.
I've certainly experienced my share of sexual harassment. It's something that most women experience, and I think at this point in time, we're fed up.
Democracy looks like discrimination in the workplace, sexual harassment and equal pay. Just some of the issues which have got women talking in the last 12 months. And for many, the only way to change the status quo is by running for office, which is why there are a record number of female candidates in this year's midterm elections.
The The Me Too movement relates a lot to my own personal journey. I wanted to become a special victims prosecutor to make sure that no victim was treated the way that I was. Unfortunately, I ended up battling cancer, and that made me realize that life is short, and I wanted the ability to effectuate greater change. My parents came here from South Korea with next to nothing to achieve the American dream, and because they were afforded those opportunities, I have the ability to pursue my American dream, which is public service.
The area of Pennsylvania where I live has been represented until recently by a congressman who was also implicated in a Me Too issue.
Pat Meehan has resigned effective immediately amid misconduct allegations.
I have been a civil rights lawyer, and I've been an education and public schools advocate for, more than 30 years in this area. And under this administration, I've seen the things that I've been fighting for challenged every single day.
What's been the biggest challenge for you running as a female candidate?
You get a lot of comments about appearance, always. What should I wear? What shouldn't I wear? Should I speak more loudly? Should I speak more softly? I guess any candidate's going to get some of that, but women seem to get more.
Running as a woman of color, a lot of folks have been extremely excited about my candidacy. But at the same time, I think that there's a stereotype that we're seen as perpetual foreigners, and I am no less American than anyone else.
What's so staggering about where we are, Pennsylvania, is that not a single woman represents this state in Congress. You are missing something.
Something very obvious.
They are all male. I did not know that.
The fact that we didn't realize there was a problem at first either, which is part of the problem.
I don't know if it's women have run and lost, or there just haven't been many women out there.
There are a record number of female candidates, but how well will they do this November? One thing is for sure, though, with Mary Gay and Pearl running head-to-head, the state of Pennsylvania will send at least one woman to Congress. Now, while politics is never far from our minds these days, at least many of us have another distraction, the World Cup, of course. And two stories we're following from there. First, Russia's made it through to the knockout round after Saudi Arabia was eliminated from their bracket in a 1-0 loss to Uruguay. No one expected much from the host nation. They were ranked dead last. And the former boss of FIFA says his visit to Russia doesn't violate his ban on football activities. Sepp Blatter says he's just an invited guest. Remember, Mr. Blatter's serving a 6-year ban from the sport following a massive corruption scandal in 2015. Now, a new exhibition at London's National Gallery takes what many consider to be a cold eye look at Donald Trump's America. Except the thing is, the paintings were created decades before the businessman and reality show star ever decided to run for president. The works by American pop artist Ed Ruscha examine the rise and fall of empire, as the BBC's David Silito reports.
This is a story about how our industrial world is changing through the eyes of a man whose life's work has been the strange landscape of modern life.
Almost any change can upset people, whether it's a glorified something or other, or whether it's the total removal of something.
They're portraits of then and now. Ed Ruscha stands with Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein as one of the giants of pop art, an artistic passion for the everyday of modern life, the gas stations, the word pictures. Oof. And the inspiration for this exhibition are these 19th century paintings by Thomas Cole about the rise and fall of empire. Ed Ruscha's rise and fall begins with our recent industrial past. The old, very American workplace is now rather less American. The trade school is, of course, now no longer a trade school, and there's a lot more security. And whatever happened to the phone booth? As you can see, it's disappeared. The question is this all about just change, or progress, or decline?
You know, it's the pain of progress and the pain of change and all of that, but it can point to things positive too.
So where are we now? Is it the peak of empire consummation, or are we on the downward slope?
They're more or less devoid of political connotations or you know, they have a moral to them. They say progress, they say, and not necessarily positive progress. So it all seems like pandemonium, but there's some kind of peace involved in it.
Peace.
Peace. Peace of mind, peace of, you know, even if it's momentary, you can still smell the roses.
So, it's just a shifting landscape that's caught his eye and is worth turning into art. What it means is up to us. But while Ed Ruscha's life and inspiration may be Los Angeles, it's a shift that's going on all around us. The question is, are we looking at a sunrise or a sunset? David Soletto, BBC News.
Sunrise or sunset? Well, remember you can find more on all the day's news at our website. I'm Rajini Vaidyanathan. Thanks for watching World News America.